Toby Keith passing away at 62 years old last night from stomach cancer. The announcement came down from the family at about 2:20 this morning. And as we roll through the 6 o'clock hour, who better to have on than one of our own, Ray Stevens. He's coming up at 10 o'clock, 10 to noon every weekday here on KCMO. And for those of you that don't know, Ray obviously an incredibly successful music career on the country side before he made the move over to the news talk side. Ray, good morning. What's your reaction to this news from early this morning?
Well, I think, first of all, my phone started buzzing at about 4:30, and I knew something was wrong. And I checked all the numbers to make sure it wasn't anybody from the family, so that was good. But, I'll be making the rounds on all the TV stations today to talk about this guy. That song you came back with, that's called Blue Moon, and that really is kind of, that's how I remember this guy. There's going to be a lot of people that remember Toby for courtesy of the Red, White, and Blue, and some of the things he wrote during the Gulf War era. But he was so much more than that, and really a deep, introspective, smart businessman. And the USO tours that he did for our men and women stationed overseas, gosh, I'm going to miss him.
Mm-hmm. I know you have some personal stories in connection with him as well. You shared a photo on your social media of your daughter with Toby Keith. So what were your personal interactions with him like?
When I was working in Chicago at US 99, which is probably the most listened to country station, and it was at the time, and I was also doing a show for our network, Westwood One, and I was going to the Palm in Nashville to talk with some of the guys, Todd Allen and some of the guys that were working Westwood One back in the day, and I walked into the wrong room at the Palm, and the Palm is a big steakhouse where everybody in Nashville, they think they're getting a good steak. Big chain steak place, and I walk into the wrong room, and it's Toby Keith, and it's the band Rascal Flatts with a bunch of guys from Coors, and they were signing the deal for the Coors Light Silver Bullet Tour, and I can't remember what year that was, but I walked in the meeting. I wasn't supposed to be there, and I go to turn around to leave, and Toby goes, "Hey, big dog, come on back in here and sit down." So I'm like, well, this should be fun. So I go back in the room and I sit down, and I'm there with all the guys from Rascal Flatts, and Toby's there, and some of the guys from Toby's label, and these big shots from Coors beer. And Toby says to me, he goes, "Now, Ray, I'm pretty smart, but I want you to sit here and have some cocktails with us and make sure that I don't get ripped off." And we proceeded to just tear that restaurant up that night. And I don't even know how I walked back to my hotel room. But that's how he was. You were always welcome around him. He was a big guy that he was former semi-pro football player, larger than life. He was a daunting presence, but he was such a good guy. And that picture of my daughter was on Toby's bus because she was dating some guy that she was all crazy about that had to meet Toby. And Toby was nice enough to let us come on his bus, just one of the several times he did. But I want to tell another story that just shows what kind of person he was. He was with his wife. They were in Vegas, and I think his daughter Crystal was there as well, who's had her own music career. And Merle Haggard's playing at the Mandalay Bay. It's a big gig for Merle. Merle was sick at the time, and you talk about the Mount Rushmore of country music. Merle Haggard's on it, right? And Merle's sick. He's got pneumonia, and he's not going to be able to play the show, but he's got to play the gig because it's a big payday for the band and for his guys. So he wanted to play the gig, and he knew he was going to have a hard time getting through it. And he heard that Toby was in town, and he called him over to the Mandalay Bay, and he asked him. He said, "Toby, how many of my songs do you know?" And Toby said, "Well, I know them all." Mm-hmm. And Merle got through 4 or 5 songs of his set in Vegas, and he said, "Hey, I want to bring out a special guest," because he knew he couldn't finish the show. And then legend has it that Toby Keith played Merle's final show, and that's just who this guy was. I mean, was he a tough guy? Did he love America? You bet he did. But he was a big, just a big, good, husband and dad at the end of it all.
Mm-hmm. Ray Stevens, he's going to be here 10 to noon on KCMO as he is every weekday. Spent his career, as you've heard, in country music before making the transition over to News Talk. So when you look back on Toby Keith, I mean, I think of a guy who was incredibly patriotic, but wasn't necessarily political. He didn't want to carry anybody's water of a political party. He just wanted to carry the red, white, and blues water, so to speak. And how much was that part of his brand? How much did he embrace that?
See, that's why you're so good at this. How are you so good at this? You know, if you hit the nail right on the head, because you're absolutely right. There's, and this is what our world does, right? They see something. If you carry a flag, if you say you love America, well, immediately you're a chest-pounding conservative Republican. Toby would always push back on that. His dad was a lifelong Democrat. His dad, a former veteran, combat veteran. And he would never pick a side, and he was always proud of that. Everybody thought they knew what he was as far as the way he stood politically, but what he really stood for was he stood for the flag. He stood for the men and women that protect our country each and every day, and he was unwavering at that. I think by the end of his career, he'd done more USO tours than Bob Hope had, and that's saying something. But you are absolutely right. He never got involved with any side. He just stood for this country and for the men and women that protect it.
And what about his ties? You know, he's an Oklahoma guy. Obviously, you'd see him at a lot of OU games and wearing OU gear. He's from Clinton, Oklahoma. How much, I mean, everyone thinks Oklahoma country music. Obviously, Garth Brooks comes to mind. But he's certainly embraced, and in many ways, I think, represented that state and was proud of that state in a way that Garth Brooks, was, but maybe not to the same level. I just think of Toby, and I think of him in OU shirts. Yeah,
I think both of those guys are pretty proud Okies. There's no doubt about it. And when you look back, at these two careers, and if it was '90s country, and even now, Garth Brooks is a force, right? He's at a level that a lot of people will never attain. He was the guy for a long, long time. But man, when you start to dig into that songbook, and you start to see about Toby Keith, the writer, Toby Keith, the businessman, Toby Keith, the bank owner, and the things and record label president, owner, the guys that he had on his record label, Toby was. I would probably put him up there with the top five of some of the smartest men in the music business, especially in Nashville. He's up there with Garth. There's no doubt about it. It's just all in your preference. And Toby stayed true to what he did and what he was. When you saw Toby Keith, that's who he was, and he never wavered from that. And there's not a lot of people that can say that.
Ray, looking forward to more thoughts coming up today at 10 o'clock, buddy. We appreciate you getting up early for us, and we'll be listening at 10 today. We appreciate the time, my man.
All right, guys. We'll talk soon.
All right. That is Ray Stevens, our midday host, 10 to noon on KCMO Talk Radio. Spent a large part of his career in country music before making the move over to talk. And Toby Keith passing away last night at the age of 62 after a near 2-year battle with stomach cancer.